I am excited to introduce Phil. Phil is a traffic engineer with SRF Consulting Group. He's experienced in transportation and traffic engineering with a focus in traffic operations analysis, transit operations, and TST, roundabouts, unique traffic control, signal operations, and a traffic signal controller interface. His experience ranges from large-scale regional operations and reliability down to the intersection level and detailed signal controller coding. He is currently managing projects for agencies across Minnesota that encompass signal optimization projects, corridor studies, and freeway improvement projects. Phil is an active member of ITE and the current NCITE secretary. For the I-494 project being presented today, Phil has worked on this project since 2018, and he led the traffic analysis, which was a key piece of the decision-making process for the various alternatives, intersection traffic control, and transportation management plans. So please join me in welcoming Phil.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Let's see here. Share my screen for everyone remote. Oh, let me do that first. All right, so yes, for today, I'm going to be talking about the I-494 project, the airport to Highway 169. So talking through the preliminary engineering project, not the design build project that is starting to get underway right now. So hopefully nobody came to get inside information on that. So as was mentioned, this project has been going on since 2018, and we're nearing the completion of this part of the project as it will begin construction next year. So today I'm going to go through what the project is hoping to accomplish. I assume anyone that's been in the metro here knows that 494 down by the airport is not the most fun roadway to drive. So probably self-evident what we're trying to accomplish with the project. There's been a large alternatives evaluation part of the project. So I'm going to go through that, talk about the corridor vision and how it's being implemented with the first construction project next year, as well as future projects in the coming years. And then I'm also going to talk about the local TMP part of the project and then some of the overhead signing. So it's going to be a bit more traffic focused, but also encompassing the overall project as well. And should have mentioned on the first slide here, so there's a lot of project partners on this project. SEH, they were the prime on this, or are the prime. So they've been heading up a lot of the civil design. SRF, we've been leading the traffic work for it. And then there's HE United, they've been leading all the drainage work. And then Samba Tech, they've done a lot of cost estimating and a really utility role in the project. So there's been a lot of consultant partners on it, as well as agency partners. Obviously, MnDOT's been involved. There's 4 cities that are included: Edina, Richfield, Eden Prairie, and Bloomington, as well as FHWA. So as everyone can imagine, tackling a project of this size, there's definitely a lot of project partners. So it's been a real team effort to deliver it. All right, so as was mentioned, this project started in 2018. And when this started in 2018, it was more of, try to talk into this mic a bit more. So this project started in 2018. And when this project started, it was more of just a corridor study and trying to figure out what could be done. And then in early of 2018, it was awarded Corridors of Commerce funding for both the corridor itself, so to put Easy Pass in there, as well as improving the I-494, I-35W interchange. So we received 2 separate Corridors of Commerce funding. And at that point, it had funding tied to it and became more of a real project. So it started shifting into more preliminary engineering and the environmental process. So over the past 4 years, we've been working through NEPA, and the actual EA rate is out for public, or it's got extended. The EA is out for public comment right now. So a lot of the work is starting to wrap up here. We know what we're going to be implementing out there next year. But today I'm going to go through really what we've done up to this point and highlight what will be constructed here over the next 3 years once that begins construction. So yeah, there's been phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3. So really it's been taking better part of 4 years to get to where we're at right now with all the decision making. Trying to figure out really what is right for the region, as this corridor does play a very large regional aspect with the airport there, the Mall of America, all the businesses along the corridor. So there's a lot of needs along the corridor, and sometimes they conflict with each other. So trying to weight them against each other to really come up with the optimal solution. All right, so project goals. The first one on here is reduce traffic congestion. As I mentioned, there's a lot of traffic congestion out there, even during COVID and on weekends. There's continual congestion both on 494 as well as I-35W as you approach 494. So some of the alternatives are looking to address those specific areas. Provide transit advantage. There is transit along the corridor that operates both on 494 and across the corridor. Safety, that's also a key metric. So when we look at the crash data, a lot of crashes have occurred over the past 10 years or so, and a lot of that is congestion related. So they kind of go hand in hand. So we'll be looking at improving safety and operations concurrently. Then the next one here is improving connectivity of pedestrians and bikes across 494. So obviously everyone knows with interstate, sometimes there's some barriers there, and really trying to reconnect some of the communities that are there. So there's crossings of 494 today, so we're looking at improving those crossings for pedestrians and bikes, widening out those bridges to provide ped facilities, as well as also implementing secondary pedestrian crossing, so a ped-only bridge in addition to the one that's out there today. And then updating infrastructure. So a lot of the bridges that are out there have been in place since the interstate was built back in the 60s. So there's really a lot of room for improvement out there. A lot of the infrastructures need maintenance, so being able to tackle both the congestion and asset management pieces are being combined here. And then also a big part of the project is drainage. So the drainage system is undersized for the runoff that occurs today, and it's right there by the Minnesota River. So there's a lot of runoff that's going into the river, and during flooding events, 494 can flood. So with this, we're looking at expanding capacity to handle more severe storm events and really reduce the flooding that's occurring on the interstate system. So that's also a very large part of this project and what will be accomplished with it. So as I mentioned, I'm going to focus a bit more on the traffic aspects of the project, since that was more of my role here on the project. So, I mean, over the 4 years, we've done a lot of traffic work, including looking at mainline alternatives. So really, what's the right cross section of 494 with regards to the number of lanes, as well as how are those lanes designated? Are they managed? Are they HOV lanes? Are they buffer lanes? So there's a lot of mainline alternatives looked at to try to help alleviate congestion. There was also a lot of alternatives looked at for I-35W and 494. Fewer alternatives, though, there, I would say, than the main line, and that's because of the work that was done roughly 10 or so years ago by SEH. They did a lot of looking at that interchange and coming up with recommendations. So we really ran with a lot of the recommendations that were provided and just more fine-tuned them for this project. Access reconfiguration and interchange type. So the area between I-35W and Highway 77, there's a lot of access in that 1.5 mile span. So, I mean, typically on a freeway system, you're more in the area of an access point every mile or so. And in that access point, there's Lindale, there's Nicollet, there's Portland, there's 12th. So there's a lot of access there. So we're looking at reconfiguring that access to help with access spacing and improve safety and operations with that. And then some of the more recent work that we've been working on here as we've transitioned from figuring out what the alternatives will be and what's getting implemented is the transportation management plan. So how will traffic be managed during construction? The overhead signing and ITS infrastructure. So that's actually a pretty interesting topic just due to how dense the corridor is for signs. It's really actually a challenge to get all the signs in that are needed out there with all the land uses out there and all the access. Interstate access requests as well. So we're modifying access to interstate. So we have to go through the FHWA process to make sure that what we're doing is meeting the needs of the interstate system. So there's obviously local needs for the interstate system, but then also national needs as well. So working through that process, as well as the Easy Pass ConOp. So expanding that document to account for this corridor. So jumping in here first, we have the mainline alternatives. So there was 2 different screening levels that were looked at here. There was a lot of different screening criteria. Traffic had several elements, but there was also elements such as environmental justice, land use. There was a lot of variables that went into play here, but The alternatives that were looked at would be adding a general purpose lane, or then the other one would be adding HOV lanes or managed lanes, so Easy Pass, formerly known as Min Pass. Those would be lane adds, not lane conversions. I know with some of those managed corridors that they're looking at just converting lane. For this project, it was assumed that all these would be lane additions. And then there was also looking at buffered and separated lanes. So like 394, where that's a separated lane going into and out of downtown, that was looked at. So providing more of a separated facility that could account for all the through trips that are on the corridor that are just going straight through. And then, so there were two versions of that. There was a buffer and a barrier. So different levels of that, different right-of-way impacts. Ultimately, it came down to more of the general purpose or managed lane. And in the end, an Easy Pass lane is being implemented out there in both directions. And here in a few slides, I'll talk about the limits of that and what's actually being constructed here with the first project. Next up here, I have the I-35W and I-494 interchange. So as I mentioned, there's heavy congestion at this interchange, particularly in the northbound to westbound direction. So vehicles coming up northbound I-35W and going westbound on 494. It's one of the busiest and most congested interchanges in the state. And it's in the top 100 across the nation on INRIX's list of interchanges. So looking at improving that. So the interchange alternatives that were looked at here were the turbine interchange, and there was a couple different levels of it. There's the one loop here on the left, and then the three loops. So what that's referring to is the amount of clover leaves remaining there. And really this was looked at more during the previous study that I had mentioned. And what was carried forward into this study was the three loop one here on the right-hand side. A lot of that was related to really the benefit cost of how those other loops weren't necessarily as heavy movements, and the cost to implement those is definitely a lot higher to do the full turbine interchange compared to the partial one that's moving forward here. As part of this project, we were looking more at how the interchange provides access to 82nd. So there on the south-hand side there, that's 82nd, which is a city street in Bloomington, and whether or not access is being provided to that or not. So we looked at a couple different ways that could be provided and what that would mean if it wasn't provided. So obviously traffic would have to reroute, so there would be impacts to that. There's definitely cost though to weaving some of those ramps together and bridge rating them. But ultimately it is recommended that access is provided to 82nd, so that will be completed here. And we are moving forward with the alternative A, which provides access. Then the next big piece of the alternative evaluation is the access reconfiguration between I-35W and Highway 77. So as I mentioned, it's a pretty dense area there with Lindale having full access, and then there's Nicollet, Portland, 12th. So with those, there's short weaving distances, short acceleration lanes. So we're looking at alternatives that consolidate that access down to Portland. So Lindale will remain in place, and then Nicollet and 12th will ultimately be closed, and they will not have access to 494, but access across 494 will remain. So those bridges will be reconstructed, and they will be able to cross in from Bloomington into Richfield. So once it was determined that access would be at Portland, various interchange alternatives were looked at. So SPUI was looked at. I mean, there's already quite a few SPUIs out there. There's SPUI at Penn, there's SPUI at Lindale. So we were looking at SPUIs, Tight Diamond, and then Texas U-turn. So it's an interchange that's common down in Texas, but not necessarily as common up here. But that was actually looked at quite heavily as part of this project, where coming off the ramps, you can make the U-turn without actually going on to necessarily the main avenue of Penn, or the main route of Penn. So that was looked at quite heavily and advanced pretty far through the evaluation process. And I just said Penn, but I meant Portland. And then DDI was looked at. So that's a pretty common interchange that's being built these days. So we looked at that one. And then we also looked at the roundabouts there. So you can see the roundabout there in the middle. So really a lot of those coming down to traffic patterns through the interchange, as well as pedestrians and bikes through there. Some of the interchanges definitely are more conducive to having pedestrians go through them, whereas like the DDI, that can be more challenging, as well as SPUIs. Cost was also a factor here as well. Obviously with like the SPUI, the bridge decks are a lot larger, so you have that. The Texas U-turn provided the ability to make those U-turns, but then it would also only allow for one-way frontage roads. Roundabouts, they have their benefits as well, particularly with pedestrians, but these would be multi-lane, so there was that factor. But ultimately, the traffic patterns aren't necessarily conducive to a DDI. There's a lot of through traffic on Portland, so the DDI, you can't progress both directions of traffic through at a time. So that had its drawbacks. The roundabouts, just the overall capacity wasn't there for the traffic we're forecasting on Portland Ave once the consolidation goes into effect. So ultimately, it's the tight diamond interchange at Portland that is moving forward here. All right. So after all the alternatives were evaluated, here's really the recommendation. So the long-term vision, this is the vision, not what's being constructed next year, is easy pass from Highway 169 to Highway 77 in both directions. So one new lane in both directions. The I-35W, I-494 interchange improvements, so that includes the turbine interchange. And then there's also quite a few bridge grades that are associated with that. So eliminating some of those weaves and really lengthening out the distance that vehicles have to merge and diverge from 494 to 35W. And then the access reconfiguration there between Highway 35W or I-35W and Highway 77. So consolidating that access, so it will be Lindale and Portland as full access interchanges. So with these, we are expecting these to help alleviate congestion, pull back some of the trips that have diverted off of 494. So like communities of Richfield and Bloomington particularly, a lot of traffic diverts from 494 during congestion time periods of the day. So a lot of their facilities take diverted traffic, such as American Boulevard and Highway or 77th Street just north of there. So with that, we're starting to see trips return back to 494 with the improvements. All right, so as I mentioned, everything is not being constructed next year. A lot of that's due to funding limitations and also just impacts due to construction. I mean, if we were constructing from Highway 169 to Highway 77, that's quite the length of a construction project. As you can imagine, there's already definitely going to be construction impacts out there for the project. But if we were to go a longer stretch than what we're looking at, there'd be impacts. And then, as I mentioned, the funding, that's definitely a limitation to that. Funding has been secured to complete the first construction project, which I will talk about which elements that is here in a minute. But looking through the implementation plan, it was divided down into 9 different elements. So you can see there's elements 1 and 2 on the west side. So that's easy pass from Highway 169 to Highway 100. Then there's elements 3 and 4. That's easy pass from 100 to 35W. And then 7, 8 is, or sorry, 8 and 9 is easy pass from 35W to 77. And then there's the interchange of I-35W and 494 as an element. And then interesting here is there's the railroad bridge. So that's a limitation that exists out there right now. There's an existing railroad bridge over 494, and that is needing to be replaced in order to accommodate easy pass between I-35W and Highway 77. So right now, there's no room to add any additional lanes in that segment of 494 unless that bridge is replaced. So that also has to be replaced. And then lastly, there's the access reconfiguration. So looking at this, there was a pretty elaborate implementation plan that was developed, looking at constructability, community support, equity of these improvements. So that's a big topic here of making sure that the improvements we're implementing are equitable and we're not unduly harming any specific any specific piece of the corridor. Asset management. So really, what's in need of replacement now based on the infrastructure that's there. Cost and funding, as I had said, that there's a lot of construction costs associated with all this. So what can be funded realistically based on the funding that's been secured? And then operations and safety. So what really addresses the needs that exist out there today, as well as what we're seeing here in the immediate future. So based on those, the first project is elements 3, 4, and 7. So that's easy pass from 100 to 35W, and then the access reconfiguration, as well as, oh, that's not in there. That's a part of the interchange. So the I-35W 494, most of the work there is going to be complete, but there is work down at 82nd that will need to be taken on at a later date with replacement of that bridge to change the grade to tie into some of the ramp terminals. Through these. So here's just a cross section of what that will look like. I mean, I assume a lot of people here are familiar with driving easy pass lanes with a little buffer between the general purpose lanes and then easy pass. So here's what that's going to look like from a highway 100 to 35W. There's going to be the general purpose lanes, and then easy pass. And then in key areas, there'll also be enforcement shoulders. So that's for allowing enforcement of the easy pass, allowing state troopers to be out there to enforce the two plus person if they're using the easy pass for free, if they're not paying for it. So it is a managed lane where if you are a single occupant vehicle, you are having to pay to use it. Here's the full vision interchange for I-35W and 494. So you can see there's the turbine. So from the northbound to westbound, you can see how that makes that movement. That removes that loop there in the northeast quadrant and replaces it with that flyover or the direct ramp, as well as then there's bridge grades on the west side there between Penn and 35W. So the weaves between Penn and 35W are removed and they're replaced with bridge grades. So that improves both safety and operations for those, as well as there are also planning to be bridge grades down there at 82nd and 35W. So it's gonna be a pretty big difference from what's out there today. It's gonna be definitely a more high capacity interchange than what's there with the Clover interchange. So with the bridge grades I just talked about, there is going to be traffic diversions on the local system. So you no longer will be able to make some of the movements to and from Penn as well as 82nd Street. So what was defined was the box part of the project. So that encompasses 82nd on the south up to 76, 77, and then Penn Avenue and then Lindale. So we were looking at the box here and how traffic would reroute and identifying if any mitigations were needed on the local system to accommodate any of these traffic diversions. And ultimately, based on the analysis, there are improvements that are going to be implemented at Penn and 82nd. So a lot of that's to accommodate the heavy southbound left turn that we're forecasting based on the access from Penn to 35W being removed. So that traffic will have to reroute down to Penn 82nd and then hop on 35W down at that interchange, as well as American Boulevard and Lindale with the traffic rerouting. Some of that's more so related to actually the traffic diversion with the access reconfiguration, but we are seeing additional turning movements at that intersection. So improvements will be implemented there with a westbound right turn lane due to that diversion. And then with this graphic here, just showing what the interchange or interchanges will look like here in the future as access is removed at 12th and Nicollet, and then Portland becomes a full access interchange. So we'll be going from those 3 access interchanges down to just the 1, as well as a new pedestrian bridge is being constructed between Portland and 12th, roughly in the Chicago area. So right now there is currently a ped bridge west of Portland that exists that will remain in place, as well as a new ped bridge is being constructed on the eastern end of the corridor with the one there at Chicago. Here's just a more zoomed out view of those changes and the layout of what's being constructed. A little bit more engineering than what I had just shown, but it's showing how some of the frontage roads are changing and how those connections are being made across 494 at 12th and Nicollet. So you can see those bridges are remaining in place, and then there's the ped bridge across 494. And then transitioning a little bit here. So after we went through all the alternatives and developed what was being recommended and being constructed with the first construction project, we transitioned into what does that mean for traffic? And this project is going design build. So what we were looking at was potential construction staging. If they go design build, the contractor has flexibility to stage it as they see fit within the realms of different criteria that MnDOT is putting in place for various ramp closures that can and cannot occur at the same time. And this project is a little unique here, I would say, just based on the approach that we're taking with the local traffic management plan. So on some projects recently, it's been looked at for installing temporary mitigations at intersections and deciding those ahead of time. With this project, there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, we're still in time of COVID. Volumes are still different than they were before. Things are changing, as well as it being, as I mentioned, design build. So there's a couple of variables here with COVID impacting things, as well as not knowing exactly what the staging will be. It's tougher to predict what are actually going to be the construction impacts. So with this, we're looking at more of a performance-based approach. So the contractor will be required to monitor the local system and implement mitigations as needed based on what's actually occurring based on their construction staging. So it's going to take into account vehicle delays, queues, looking at safety, crashes, pedestrians. And really what this does, it allows MnDOT and the agencies to really respond to what's occurring based on the construction. So we're not implementing mitigations that might not be needed. We don't really want to implement mitigations that are unnecessary. So we don't want to spend that for funding reasons. I mean, if we're installing temporary signals, that definitely has a cost associated with it, as well as drivers' expectations and responding to traffic control. We're not wanting to implement control changes out there. They're not needed. So it allows MnDOT and the agencies to be more adaptive to what actually occurs out there. As part of that, this map shows the intersections that are planned to be monitored, optimized, adjust signal timing during construction. So it's really the stretch from East Bush Lake Road over to 24th, bound by 76 on the north and American on the south, with some fewer outliers there, as we're also expecting some diversions and some detour routes to take some of those. So these are the 79 intersections that are planned to be monitored, optimized, and adjusted as part of the project during construction. And really with this, I mean, a lot of agencies are installing ATMSs out there to monitor their signals and be able to make changes remotely. There are some signals out there that do not have communication, so that will be implemented with this project. So then the agencies can respond real time to changes. They're not having to go out to cabinets necessarily. They can make them more on the fly. And this summer, we are collecting counts out there to be used as more of a baseline understanding of really what's going on out there. This corridor, this area hasn't really been retimed for quite a few years now. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes with COVID and that. So really having a baseline for counts this summer before construction starts up next year to help with that. So pretty interesting, unique process that's being implemented with this project that we got to develop with this. And then lastly, not diving into too many details here, but the overhead signing. So as I mentioned, that was really actually a pretty critical piece of this project and really figuring out how to do it. So with the access changes that are occurring, we're having to modify signing with the easy pass lanes, with all the access reconfiguration that's occurring. There's definitely rerouting of traffic and how they use the network. So there's accounting for local wayfinding on this, as well as more of the regional system and how that works. So there was a lot of collaboration here with FHWA, MnDOT, the MAC also on the east end there with the airport. There's airport signing out there. So there was collaboration with the MAC and what their needs are, both near term here and in the future as they're looking to expand. So there's definitely a lot of signing needs out there, and really trying to meet all of the guidance that exists can be a challenge, but that we have developed a concept that can be moved forward. So that was also something that's been wrapped up here pretty recently as we're transitioning into the design build phase. So with that, that's really the main pieces of the projects that I wanted to cover today. So I guess at this point I can turn it over to any questions. And I may or may not be able to answer depending on what it is and how that relates to the design build project. Yes, Orange Line was definitely considered, and that was actually a key part of 82nd Street too, is maintaining that access and how that would look during construction due to the Orange Line, because the Orange Line, in this figure you can see, uses 82nd, comes up Knox, and then crosses under 494 under the new tunnel that was just opened. So that was something that was considered also with the design, as well as how those two interact with the Orange Line tunnel there, and really what the alternatives at 35W would look like just due to that geometry that is already being built and is now under operation. So that was definitely considered here.
Braided ramps are kind of new to me. Is that anywhere else in Minnesota, or is it going to be examples from other states?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, the question is the bridge braids and how those are. Do they exist in Minnesota, or are there other examples of those? And I want to say yes. None are coming to mind right offhand. So if anyone else can think of bridge braids right offhand, 35, yeah. Yeah, there's examples on that. So yeah, I mean, it really, with the bridge braids, it pulls like this ramp over and this, so you eliminate the weave. So it definitely helps with congestion there, and particularly at Penn and 35W with that short weave that existed. So we didn't want to remove access there, but with that short weave between 35W and Penn, I mean, that's definitely an issue today, and we're seeing that be more of an issue as more traffic is expected to use the corridor in the future. So those are being carried forward. This one here in the southbound direction is not being constructed with the first construction project, but all the other ones on this figure will exist when the project's complete here roughly in 2026 or so. Other questions? Airport and airlines. Construction or long-term? All. So during construction, you're talking about? Yeah, so during construction, I mean, that's what some of the work on the local system is being looked at. So with American Boulevard and 77th, all those signals that I highlighted, so those are gonna be monitored to optimize and change based on the staging that takes place. 62nd, that is, or Trunk Highway 62, that is a parallel corridor, just a couple miles north. That's staying in operation. There's no construction on that. Trunk Highway 13, there is a project down on that corridor, which is a few miles south, but that will be wrapped up by the time this one goes under construction here. So there are other routes here. There are parallel corridors that can be used, as well as the local system. Definitely gonna be monitoring that and trying to do everything that can to make it as least painful as possible. But I mean, 494 under construction is definitely congested today, so there definitely will be likely impacts on the local system. So it's trying to do everything we can to mitigate those and make that as painless as possible here over the next 3 years when construction is occurring.
Are you going to manually count all 79 intersections?
Yeah, I'm sitting out there every day, Monday through Friday, with a little count board. No, we are actually collecting the counts, so they will be true counts. So we're setting cameras here. Some of my team is really looking forward to that this summer, of setting all the cameras, getting some sun out there. But then it'll be processed with video analytics to actually get the counts. But those will be all set to actually have true counts. Other questions? Here. So what's the compliance rate? Yeah, so roughly, I mean, we're seeing 1,500 to 1,700 vehicles use the lane, depending on where you are on the corridor and what peak period. So we definitely were seeing a higher usage of that. So that was one reason why we wanted Easy Pass versus the HOV. We were definitely seeing that with the HOV lane, that it would be fairly underutilized based on the occupancy counts that were taken out there and the regional trail demand modeling that was done. That's typically MnDOT's target or so is around the 1,400, 1,500 is to maintain that as free flow. So that's kind of their target when they're pricing it out, is to maintain that, because starting much more than that, it starts to break down. So that's kind of what we were seeing. Someone just started a vacuum cleaner or something, so it was really hard to hear. What was the question again? Yes. Yes, good question. That definitely was a factor here and something we had to look at. Really, what does that mean? Because we are going to be pushing more traffic through, so that did affect the design of the Easy Pass and some of the how we do the first construction project and tie back down to existing. Because with the first project here, most of it's going to be tied back down at Lindale. Luckily, I-35W is a major generator and trip, so we are definitely seeing getting more vehicles there as a benefit to get them there faster. But yeah, as you mentioned, there will be impacts, but we are also seeing that cleaning up access between 35W and 77 definitely helps with that. So while we might be delivering more traffic, it's definitely should be a more seamless flow through there.